What's up, y'all? Coach Matthew going into week number 2, talking about the squat. A little different than the hinge we talked about last week, seeing as it's also the name of an exercise, but a little more complex as we add some knee bend in. So with the hinge, if you remember last week, we pushed the hips back behind you, but here with the squat, we're trying to drop the hips low while adding some knee bend. So bending the knees, dropping the hips straight down, and squeezing the quads and the glutes to finish off the full rep. So again, one we're familiar with, but still got some extra things to talk about. The first big thing to look at when it comes to challenging and getting the most out of your squat is range of motion. But there might be a couple of things preventing you from getting a little bit lower without your heel coming off the ground. That's the biggest sign to not go any lower, is it puts more pressure through the ankle and obviously puts them at risk for injury instead of just training the quads and the glutes like we're hoping for. First big thing that might be preventing you from getting a little bit lower in your squat is genetics, as the length of your femur tells us usually how low you're able to squat. But the second thing, it could be ankle mobility. So if as you're trying to get lower and you feel your heels peeling off the ground, if you feel some tightness around the back of your heel, right around the Achilles tendon, it's probably ankle mobility and is worth trying to get lower and lower while still keeping your heels taped down to the ground. But if you feel no pressure there, just a little bit of instability, it's probably genetics. It'll work with what you got. And like any exercise, we can always challenge it by adding more weight. But that takes finding quality range of motion that we just talked about, and more importantly, locking in your form, making sure it's picture perfect. And there are two questions you can ask yourself to find out if you're ready for more weight on a squat. That's, are my knees caving and does my back hurt? Now, knee cave is exactly what it sounds like. As you're bending the knees and dropping down into your squat, especially when you go to transition to pushing back off, a knee will buckle underneath you and cave in. It's one way your body's trying to tell you the weight you have might be a little bit too heavy. So we'll regress just a little bit, either going a little lighter or even just body weight to focus on driving the knees out and giving them a solid foundation, keeping them over top of your heels to keep them strong. So again, try to screw the feet into the ground, push the knees out a little bit, and actively focus on pushing them apart from each other, keeping even pressure through your entire foot. And the next thing is back pain, which usually comes from an unsupported spine, especially as the weight crosses past your waist, whether that's goblet or front squat, which we see all the time in here. So we'll try to brace the core. But it's more than just squeezing everything together. Take a deep breath into the diaphragm, expand and fill the gut with air, then squeeze. Keep that pressure there, and you'll notice the spine pushes back into place, and you keep that tension as you go to squat. And just like with the deadlift, there is a big difference when it comes to conventional versus a sumo stance with a squat. Conventional, just a reminder, toes are pointed forward, knees are pointed forward, just bending straight down. In sumo, we take things a little bit wider, toes are pointed out, and the knees are pointed out. Sumo tends to highlight knee cave when it's there, but it can also show us how to prevent knee cave even in conventional. Now, looking at it from the side, it's a little easier to see this way. I'll try to get my toes pointed straight toward the camera. We set up just like usual, feet a little wider than shoulder width, toes pointed out, and we drop the hips straight down. And you might be thinking, there's nothing wrong with this, but we're trying to keep your knees in line and pointed in the same direction as your toes by opening up the hips, pushing the knees out. And when we come back up to the top, because the knees were pushed out, we have to use the inside of the thigh to pull them back together. And that's the whole point of going into sumo in the first place, is to work the inside of the thigh and not just the front. Back to knee cave and conventional. Still, focus on pointing the knees right where the toes are and driving them out just a little bit by rotating out some. Now that's just the tip of the iceberg for squats. If you guys have any other questions, you can always ask them here or in person. But keep an eye out for next week where we go over lunges. Now take care.